All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Look, today we're basically going to act as your personal legal decoder ring. We live in this crazy world where the news is just constantly flooded with massive indictments, weird split verdicts, constitutional crises, the whole shebang. But the legal system speaks its own language, right? It's all statutes, clauses, and technicalities. So our goal right now is to translate the most complex courtroom daddles happening today into plain, everyday English. That way you can actually understand what's going down behind the judge's bench.
Here's our roadmap for today. Number 1, decoding white-collar crime. Number 2, politics in the courtroom. 3, the true crime phenomenon. And finally, 4, the Supreme Court decoded. Let's get to it.
Part 1. Decoding white-collar crime beyond the legalese. We're starting things off in the financial capital of the world. You know, when billions of dollars just magically vanish, the actual legal charges sound incredibly abstract. But deep down, they're usually pretty simple. Let's bust some jargon right out of the gate. You've probably heard terms like wire fraud or commodities manipulation thrown around on the news. Well, strip away the fancy legal speak, and it basically just means using high-tech methods, like an app or a quick email, or using fake numbers to lie to people and steal their cash. It's old-school deception, just scaled up for the digital age. Now, what's really fascinating here is that the Southern District of New York, the SDNY, is going after these specific types of complex financial deceptions super aggressively. Under U.S. Attorney Jay Clayton, who actually used to run the SEC, this office is zeroing in on everything from private credit markets to massive cryptocurrency frauds. They're essentially the frontline translators, turning really complicated market maneuvers into federal indictments. Look at this scorecard. I think it brilliantly shows how those complicated legal terms translate into real-world consequences for some of the biggest names in crypto. Take the founders of Samurai Wallet. They openly marketed their platform for cleaning dirty Bitcoin, and they're looking at 4 to 5 years. Then you've got Do Kwon of Terraform Labs and Alexander Mashinsky of Celsius. Listen, these aren't just slaps on the wrist for writing some bad code. These are major criminal sentences for flat-out lying to investors. So the crucial takeaway here is that a complex, algorithmic failure of the Terra USD stablecoin, a system that literally wiped out billions of dollars globally, resulted in a very simple, very tangible 15-year prison sentence for its founder, Do Kwon. The technology was super modern, sure, but the fraud, as old as time. And hey, it's not just crypto. We're seeing a staggering $949 million penalty handed down to Omnicare under what's called the False Claims Act. That is just a massive, heavy legal term for fraudulently billing the government for prescription drugs. They dispense drugs to the elderly without valid prescriptions and then billed Medicare and Medicaid for it. Again, simple fraud, massive legal penalty, nearly $1 billion.
Moving on to Part 2, politics in the courtroom, the SPLC indictment.
Let's see how this all builds into a radically different type of law, where we have to navigate the extremely polarized intersection of politics and federal indictments. This is where decoding the law gets deeply complicated by partisan narratives. Now, to stay strictly neutral here, we're putting the Department of Justice's specific legal charges on one side and the Judiciary Committee's fierce counterclaims right there on the other. The DOJ, under the Trump administration, indicted the Southern Poverty Law Center, or the SPLC. The DOJ argues that by paying informants to infiltrate white nationalist groups, the SPLC was actually providing material support to those groups and basically defrauding their own donors. But on the flip side, a Congressional Judiciary Committee argues this is just a baseless weaponization of the justice system to attack a civil rights group that opposes the president. So, if we strip away the intense political rhetoric from both sides, these are the absolute undisputed facts of the case. The SPLC did pay informants, and one of those informants did allegedly steal 25 boxes of documents from an extremist group's headquarters. The core legal question the court actually has to decide is whether this pretty common undercover tactic legally constitutes defrauding the donors who funded the organization. Interestingly enough, several donors have actually gone to the press saying, "Hey, we knew about this, and we supported the use of informants all along." As this post from Donald Trump demonstrates, complex legal indictments are absolutely no longer just debated in courtrooms. They are immediately digested, spun, and debated in the court of public opinion. Legal actions are instantly translated into political talking points by both sides, which makes our job of decoding the actual law that much more important. Which brings us to Part 3, the true crime phenomenon, the public as jury. We are living in an era of absolute true crime obsession, where everyday people are translating and interpreting high-profile cases in real time. Let's break down the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. This completely dominated the headlines recently, but it ended in a very complex split verdict. When that verdict dropped, social media was just flooded with people totally confused by how a person could be found both guilty and not guilty at the exact same time. Well, here is the translation of that verdict. The jury looked at the evidence and acquitted him of the massive, overarching racketeering and sex trafficking conspiracy charges. However, they did find him guilty under a very specific federal law called the Mann Act. In everyday English, this means the jury believed he was guilty of transporting individuals across state lines specifically for the purpose of prostitution, and that resulted in a 50-month prison sentence. The law requires prosecutors to prove every single element of every specific charge, which, often leads to these super confusing split decisions. The public's intense desire to decode the law themselves is most evident in the crazy rise of true crime podcasts and internet sleuths. Take a look at the recent coverage of singer-songwriter D4 Vade's arrest for the alleged murder of a 14-year-old girl, Celeste Rivas Hernandez. As the massively popular true crime podcast Rotten Mango points out in their coverage, when the legal system is a bit slow to provide answers, the public just uses the internet to launch their own investigations. In this particular case, internet sleuths started analyzing songs released by the suspect's brother right after the arrest, searching for any hidden confessions or accomplices. The public is essentially trying to bypass the courtroom entirely to find their own version of the truth. Finally, Part 4, the Supreme Court Decoded: Life, Death, and Intellect. For this last section, we are taking our legal decoder ring up to the highest court in the land to examine a literal case of life and death. Now, when the Supreme Court speaks, it sets the rules for the entire country. But sometimes, the questions they face are almost impossible to answer clearly. Like, how does a judge or a jury definitively measure something as complex and fluid as human intelligence when someone's actual life is on the line? To understand this specific case, we really have to translate the Eighth Amendment. In everyday English, this is the foundational constitutional rule blocking the government from using cruel and unusual punishment. Well over 2 decades ago, the Supreme Court ruled that under this amendment, it's unconstitutional to execute someone who is intellectually disabled, simply because they lack the mental capacity to fully comprehend their punishment. But they left a massive gray area. They left it up to the individual states to define exactly what intellectually disabled means. This entire constitutional crisis essentially came down to basic math and standard margins of error. Alabama law says you can't be executed if your IQ is 70 or below. The inmate, Joseph Clifton Smith, scored between 72 and 78. So Alabama said, well, he's above 70, execute him. But a lower federal court stepped in and recognized something crucial. An IQ test isn't a perfect absolute number. Because of the test's built-in margin of error, his lowest score of 72 could mathematically actually be a 69. Ultimately, the Supreme Court dismissed Alabama's appeal to proceed with the execution, keeping Smith off death row based on that more holistic look at his mental capacity. Justice Sonia Sotomayor's candid admission regarding this whole case is just fascinating. She explicitly stated that the Supreme Court is not equipped to tell lower courts how to perfectly assess multiple IQ scores. That reveals a pretty profound truth. Even the highest, most powerful judges in the entire country struggle to perfectly translate messy human psychology and scientific margins of error into strict black and white legal standards. So as you digest all this information today, from tech-savvy financial frauds to the partisan battles over the First Amendment, all the way up to the Supreme Court debating the literal math of an IQ test, I want you to leave with this thought. Are our traditional legal dictionaries and definitions of justice evolving fast enough to handle the sheer complexities of the modern world? Thank you so much for joining me to decode it all today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.